What's up guys, Loom here. Welcome back to the channel and thanks for tuning in. Today we're going to talk about keybinding, how I keybind all of my characters, what I do to keep things consistent across all my characters and specs. I do play every spec in the game at least a little bit. I've completed the Mage Tower on every spec in the game across several different expansions. I've written video guides on them. Last year I completed Zekvir on every class, multiple specs for some of the classes. I have the same goal this tier. I plan on completing the Underpin hard mode on every class in the game, multiple specs for some classes. And I believe one of my core strengths in this game is being able to pilot all of my tunes to a sufficient degree so I can pick them up and play whenever I feel like. Some specs obviously I play a little bit more. I am more of a tank player than anything else. There are several DPS specs that I've played far more than others. I genuinely love the solo challenges in WoW. WoW has some of the best combat in any game I've played. It's very responsive, it's very fair. And if you're familiar with any of my content, you know I do this without an abundance of add-ons showing me procs, cooldowns, rotation helpers, any of that. I pretty much just play with an action bar add-on and a party and nameplate add-on. Before we get started with actual ability keybinds, I'll talk quickly about how I move my character in the game. The majority of my movement I do with my left hand. Q and E strafe me left and right. W is forward, S is backwards. I understand some people unbind their S key. I would not recommend that. Being able to back up is very helpful for tanking. It allows you to keep mobs in front of you, as they do tend to fan out if you have a very large pack. And it also allows you to do a little bit of a strafe kite just away from mobs. Combining that with a little bit of camera movement allows you to do a backward circular kite path, which is very helpful for tanking, keeping mobs in a relatively localized area, but also eliminating a lot of the auto attacks that will hit you, especially if there's any type of snare you have on the mobs. Paladin Consecrate, Death Knight, Death and Decay, stuff like that. A and D is typically pivot camera left and right. An action that's redundant, you can take care of this with your mouse button. Just holding right click and moving left or right allows you to accomplish this. Not to mention that the keybinds are quite a bit slower than using your mouse hand. Keyboard turning is definitely one of the most inefficient things you can do in the game. I highly recommend not doing it. Additionally, you free up two keybinds, A and D, which you can use for a variety of abilities. And while we're talking about movement with the mouse, I also have the ability toggle auto run bound to my mouse. There's individual binds for start auto run and stop auto run. There's also one for toggle auto run. This means if you're moving, it'll stop it, and if you're not moving, it'll start it. I've had this bound for 10 or more years, and while we're on the topic, holding shift and pressing that same button is my mount button. Just another way I keep things compartmentalized. Mount up button is something you could probably do without. If you're trying to expand the number of keybinds you do have, cannibalizing your current mount button is certainly a good way to go about it. Mine used to be F2, it used to be Shift 2, and now it is Shift Toggle Auto Run. Now, building out my actual keybinds for the class I'm playing, as you can see I'm on Rep Paladin here. My rotation bar, as it were, is 1 through 5, and then I use tilde. I think it's important and super helpful to set yourself up for a priority of sorts when it comes to binding your abilities. There's a few different ways I set this up depending on how the spec plays. I'll compare it to Outlaw Rogue here. Rat Paladin has 3 spenders, but one is single target, one is AoE, and one is a heal. I actually keep large AoE or AoE spender abilities on my mouse. So that's Divine Storm, Earthquake, Rain of Fire, Spinning Crane Kick, stuff like that. That means it's not a button that needs to be on this bar. So my one spender, Templar's Verdict, is going to be on my number 1. Judgment, Blade of Justice, Hammer of Wrath. These are going to be found generally in descending order, left to right. That means if I can't press 1, I'm pressing 2. If I can't press 2, I'm pressing 3, so on and so forth. A little bit of an exception for that is that tilde, and that's long since been my very low priority button or spam filler AoE button. Blessed Hammer, Crusader Strike, Thunderclap, Blood Boil. If I were to compare this setup to Outlaw Rogue, you're going to see that Outlaw Rogue generally has one builder and multiple spenders. So that spam builder is going to be on 1, Sinister Strike. This is similar to how my casters work. Fireball and Frostbolt are both on number 1, and then the spender or conditional abilities are in descending order on 2 to 5, 2 to 4, whatever I need. Between the Eyes, Dispatch, Kidney Shot. And while you can see here that Feint is actually on my tilde button here, if I were playing Assassination, this would actually be Fan of Knives. Now we're going to add my next 2 bars, which is actually 1 bar. The placement just above my rotation bar is F1 and F2. This used to be F3 and F4 as well, I actually keep those slots in case I want to play something that I would otherwise want to keep track of, but not necessarily press. Wings used to go here before you could tie it to Wake of Ashes through a cooldown. You would never be pressing Wings unless you had Wake of Ashes available. That's just kind of how the class functions, and that's why the talent exists now as it does. F1 and F2. As I opened up more ability binds, I stopped using buttons that I can't reach as comfortably. F1 on every spec that has it is taunt, and F2 is my interrupt on every spec, with the exception of healing priests. That button's actually empty on my healing priests. I have sufficient keybinds to place any other abilities in any number of other spots. F2 is my interrupt. I'm never going to be pressing that button unless I'm interrupting something. Doubly easy now, as Boomkin can no longer get Skull Bash. It's just Solar Beam. That used to be a concession I made. My Boomkin spec didn't have taunt on F1. It was Solar Beam, and Skull Bash was F2. No longer a problem now, so it's appropriately taunt and then interrupt. And on specs that don't have a taunt, I actually do use F1 for other things. Things that tend to be rotational, but also conditionally rotational. Things like Blade Flurry, things like Havoc, things like shorter cooldowns if I can't fit all of the cooldowns on Shift 1 through 4. And then above that, we have Shift 1 through 4. These are going to be cooldowns based on the role I'm playing. So for my healers, those are going to be healer cooldowns. For my tanks, those are going to be defensive cooldowns. And for all my other specs, they're going to be offensive cooldowns, or if you want to think of it another way, very long cooldown rotational abilities. Some people call Wake of Ashes a cooldown. Some people consider it a rotational ability. That's my Shift 1. And then I'm putting cooldowns on Shift 2 through 4, essentially in order of how frequently I'm pressing them. But if there's a specific order I want to press these cooldowns, first one's going on Shift 1, second on 2, 3, 4, etc. And this is actually a good time to mention tank cooldowns and kind of how those function. There's kind of two types of tank cooldowns. There's tank cooldowns that boost your offensive as well as defensive capabilities. Things like Eye of Tyr, Divine Toll, Sentinel, or Avenging Wrath. And without getting too far into the specifics of how tank cooldowns work, in general, tank cooldowns that are offensive and defensive in nature, you want to press those highly regularly. Whereas something like Survival Instincts or Icebound Fortitude, you're not necessarily running in, pressing these on your first button, as they're not really amplifying anything you're doing besides your defensive abilities. These are buttons that you press regularly, but you're also holding for moments when you need them. Especially when it comes to Death Knights, you're not necessarily pressing Rune Weapon and Icebound Fortitude at the same time. You're running in, pressing Rune Weapon, as it greatly increases your damage and threat and survivability. That's a button you're pressing all the time. Icebound Fortitude, I'm actually shoving that off into a different part of my rotation. And a soft rule for tank cooldown management is you're pressing the lower cooldown first. The newest binds I've added to my gameplay, A and D, as we spoke about earlier, are camera turn left, camera turn right, incredibly inefficient abilities to use. This bar is a little bit more subject to the class, spec, or even race I'm playing. As you can see, A here is Arcane Torrent. Any class that has a cleanse type ability I have bound to C. This is more for myself than anything else. As I spoke about earlier, I do have party and raid frames that I would use to dispel anybody else in my group. I think it's very important to have your own personal button for self-heals, self-dispels, even spells that you would have bound to Healbot or a similar add-on. Managing your own health bar through that type of add-on is essentially just adding a different variation of clicking your abilities. You can click several different abilities with 1 or 2 or 3 different button combinations through that add-on, but adding a self-cleanse, adding an @player, self-heal for Word of Glory, stuff where I'm not having to move my mouse somewhere else specifically to hit this button, it's a gameplay improvement. If you already have party and raid frames, I could see this as being a somewhat low priority thing to do, maybe slightly higher priority if you are a tank and need those buttons ASAP. And frankly, this is just a product of me having more binds than I know what to do with on a lot of classes. I will say on pretty much every class, B is my stun. For Rogue, it's blind, and stun is actually on 4 because it's a combo point spender and very low cooldown at that. And B for blind just sounds a little bit better. I admit there's an inconsistency there, but rogues do have a little bit more CC than a lot of classes. And also in stealth, my number 4 button is cheap shot, so there's a consistency there within the rogue specs. Nothing's going to be perfect. Every class does have a different number of CC, defensive, offensive, off healing, dispels, purges, rotational abilities, cooldowns, all that stuff, right? What you may or may not have noticed at this point is that none of these are actual mouse binds. These are all actually left hand abilities. These are all buttons that I'm only pressing with my left hand. And again, I'm never clicking any of these. These are all buttons I can easily reach with my left hand. Minor exception is T and L. L is my looter ring. T is my car. These are just, you know, like if I have a bloodlust, L is my bloodlust, and I'm actually pretty adept at reaching over and hitting that with my left thumb, although bloodlust is definitely an ability I wouldn't begrudge anybody not binding, right? You don't want to accidentally press lust. It's a 10-minute cooldown, you know, unless you're rapid fire pulling bosses a little bit faster than that and getting resets, but lust is not a button you want to hit accidentally. But also, if you have a Looterang, hey, that's a good button too. And T is just there. I did use T quite a bit as a bind, but have since moved off it. But there's a little bit of room there to click something silly like my car for Liberation of Undermine Raid. Super casual stuff, I know. So those are all left-hand abilities. Now, what am I doing with my right hand? My right hand is my mouse hand. So one, this is why you actually see my party and raid frames on my right-hand side. My right hand is on my right-hand side. And so it feels really good to have those frames right here. It also keeps them out of the center of my screen, which would otherwise obstruct my view. And having them on the left side of my screen would really give me this, if you ever remember woodshop class back when they used to teach woodshop in high schools, right? That'd be like crossing your hands. Like you never do that. In woodshop, you're going to cut off your hand or a finger or something like that. So while certainly not the mistake you're going to make in World of Warcraft, it does feel really gross to have my bars over here. Either way, right-hand side, which is the bars I do set up for my mouse binds. And it's going to look like a lot, but there are some shift modifiers. So I'm going to start from the right end here. And you're going to see Lay on Hands and Divine Shield. This is actually Shift Mouse Wheel Up and Shift Mouse Wheel Down. Now, I highly recommend binding Mouse Wheel Up and Mouse Wheel Down into your camera zoom. On top of just the benefits of being able to easily manipulate your camera at will, being able to zoom in and zoom out is super helpful. Maybe not something you need in every combat scenario. Camera zoom is just something that I've had as my mouse wheel in and out forever. That's probably how WoW is by default. I'm not even sure. Let me know in the comments if it is. Shift mouse wheel up on basically any class that has a very powerful self-heal is a very powerful self-heal. Think Lay on Hands, Renewal for druids. Shift mouse wheel down is a little bit more common across classes. Icebound Fortitude, Enraged Regeneration, Survival Instincts, Ice Block, Desperate Prayer. And I do have that kind of shift mouse wheel up is bringing my health bar up. Shift mouse wheel down is me turtling. Kind of a goofy thing, but hey, it's all about compartmentalization, how you're thinking about the abilities when you press them, and actually a bit of a deviation for that. On Monk and Warlock, shift mouse wheel up is my set teleport, and shift mouse wheel down is my teleport too. It just feels really good to have those buttons there. And just moving inward, I have a mouse button for AoE. This Consecrate button is also my Divine Storm and Light of Dawn, Spinning Crane Kick, Rain of Fire, Whirlwind, Death and Decay, Earthquake, Seed of Corruption. Using that very same button with the shift modifier is actually an AoE disrupt. So this is Blinding Light, this is Incapacitating Roar, this is Shadow Fury, Psychic Scream, Shockwave, Dragon's Breath, Leg Sweep, Sigil of Misery is another one. Just shift AoE is my AoE CC. Again, compartmentalizing it to a degree. You'll notice a lot of those are also abilities that you have to select a location with your mouse and then press. Having those abilities on my mouse is highly important for me. Having to position my mouse while I'm pressing the keybind with my left hand does not feel good. Things that I'm going to be pointing and then pressing, just very handy to put that on a mouse button as well. And I'll just point out the mouse I do use and I've used for a couple of years now is the Logitech G600. There are 12 buttons on the side here. I use 5. That might be a lot. I could certainly offload some of those to my other keybinds. Getting the G600, I think, greatly elevated my gameplay. If you're somebody that doesn't want to make the switch to an MMO mouse, I totally get it. The G600 is pretty inexpensive. I have a backup. I pay $40 for either one, maybe even $34 on sale. I do recommend it. There's also a lot of other cool things about the mouse. There's a third finger button that I have bound to shift. I couldn't even tell you all the scenarios where I press my mouse shift instead of my shift on my keyboard, but it's kind of neat to have there. I think it's actually there to manage or change your DPI settings in the same game for different things you're doing. Like I think if you're in sniper mode, you can severely reduce your sensitivity of your mouse. Either way, neither here nor there. A button that I don't really use too much anymore, but sometimes I have tied it to a dot, is just clicking in my mouse wheel button. I don't like it because it's loud. I'm not even sure you guys can hear that, but if you can, woof. I also have like Moonfire bound to this button. Bear actually has room for Moonfire on my number 4 button. The other specs don't. But if you're selecting a bunch of different targets and Moonfiring them, much like the way I like to have my targeted AoE abilities also on my mouse, it is nice to click, middle click, click, middle click, click, middle click, right? Again, that's a button that's largely being phased out. On my Paladin, you can see that's my Nitro boost, my belt enchant, right? We talked about AoE finishers, targeted AoE, AoE disrupts, shift mouse wheel up and down for teleports and heals. Very important buttons that I would also consider you have on your mouse are personal heals. It's where my Ardent Defender and Guardian buttons are for Paladin, but it's also my Word of Glory, and I'm shifting Word of Glory is my health potion. My speed boost button is just my horse, but if I shift that, it's my Blessing of Freedom. Having a movement speed effect is probably a little bit less important than having self heals or a potion or health stone on your mouse. I kind of highly recommend all three. You might be saying to yourself, oh, this is a whole lot of mouse buttons, but frankly, we're playing WoW. WoW has a lot of buttons. The faster access you have to those buttons, things like potions are reactive. It is a long cooldown. For that reason, you see a lot of people clicking them. In my opinion, having to skill shot my potion, which is what you're doing if you're having to click the ability. One, it removes your ability to move your camera or even to quickly camera turn away from where you currently are, right? It's a liability. And when I do have a Warlock Stone available on this class, that is my shift middle click. On a lot of different classes, that button can easily fit in these four over here in my defensive or self-heal category. And I know I covered a lot of things here. Hopefully you found some of it helpful, but I would say my keybinds, my setup do a lot of things. They allow me to manage my cooldowns visually without pulling my attention away from the center of my screen. The only button that I have a bind for that I'm not looking at is my mount up button, but I know that's my toggle auto run and mount up button. I guess technically my extra action button, which is bound to G, and my interact key. Highly recommend binding your interact key, especially if you plan on fighting the Underpin this season. I have that bound to R, and I know you're thinking, well, that's your reply button. No, my reply button is Shift R. I do the same thing for my character pane with C. I use that as a bind. Shift C is my character pane. Shift V is my enemy health bars, hide and show feature. Shift B is my bags. This prevents spam opening or spam toggling certain features on the game and gives me access to new binds. And it is right there next to my movement abilities for my left hand. I do hope I'm able to edit this mess into some semblance of a helpful structure. We'll see. I will say key binding, in my experience, is one of the least talked about things in the game. I think making adjustments to how you play and how you interface with the game is scary for a lot of reasons. In part, you do have to play a little bit worse to get a little bit better. If you're a golfer, you know it's just like making a swing change, right? It's just something you got to do to get a little bit better. I believe WoW is a game that we all play so much that you should always be trying to improve how you play. This is no judgment if you just want to keep clicking your abilities, but I do find it really detracts from your ability to play the game. I know there are many people out there that will swear by their clicking. Give it a shot. Change one bind a month. And in a year, which is a small amount of time when it comes to World of Warcraft, you will have 12 new binds. And that's probably enough to cover what you're missing. And I'm not here to talk down to anybody who's clicking anything. I just want this to serve as help for people who are maybe stuck in that rut. This setup has allowed me to bind every button in the game, the exception of my Looter Ring, Bloodlust, or my G99 Breakneck Car for the Liberation of Undermine raid, right? But guys, that's about all I got for this one. I want to thank you so much for watching. Sub to the channel if you're not yet subbed. It really helps us out a lot. Share the video with your friends. Like the video if you liked it. Let me know in the comments how it helped. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.